You can probably tell, if you've listened to any previous episode of this show or followed me online for any amount of time, that I really value vulnerability and authenticity and honesty. And the people who are closest to me tend to be people who value those things too. And on that wavelength, I'm really excited about today's guest, Vicky Salcido-Cobbe. This is episode 14 of the Medicine Stories podcast, and I'm your host, Amber Magnolia Hill. Vicky gets so real in this episode. She talks about things that we have not talked about yet on this show, things that make me nervous to talk about. It brought up a lot for me thinking about the things that she was sharing, thinking about my own stories around them. And so I guess this will be the part where I say that this is a pretty adult show, and I'm going to talk about some things here in the intro that we talk about in the interview. So fair warning if you got someone around who might not be ready for this content to listen later. Well, I suppose I'll tell you first about Vicky if you don't already know her. And then I'm going to tell you about the rad things she's giving away on Patreon this month. You're going to love it. So Vicky Salcido-Cobbe is the proud daughter of Mexican immigrants who is absolutely in love with the garden and natural world. After years of self-destructive habits, you know we talk about that, her life changed in an instant when a clinician offered her a bottle of herbal extract as medicine. Since then, she has been amazed time and again by the powerful ways plants work with our every being. She is currently one of 4 caretakers of 160 acres of land that is home to various untouched ecosystems and their inhabitants. When she's not gardening, teaching, or writing, she actively participates in an empowered group of local herbalists called the Mendocino County Herb Guild. She and her husband, Russ, also work with the land to create small-scale remedies for their herbal apothecary, La Tierra Buena Collective, formerly Grandmother's Medicine. So in the interview, we talk about names as seeds planted by our parents, the years Vicky was lost to herself with some drugs and tall cans, and how she found herself again with the moon and tall trees. How having big, mystical experiences without proper integration afterward can actually end up causing more confusion and pain than healing. How nature and the ancestors have always sustained humanity, and why we feel so bereft when we lose connection with them, and how we find ourselves when we rekindle those relationships. How this suburban SoCal girl stumbled upon the plant path. She says, herbalism was the way I reclaimed myself. We talk a little bit about the realities of running an herbal products business. It's not as glamorous and certainly not as easy as some people think it is. We go on a little random side thing into one weird use for breast milk. We talk about dreaming about Walmart and what it means when you have mostly mundane dreams, which most of us do most of the time. And yeah, so then Vicky, we get into the heart of it where she gets really, really real about the evolution of her sexuality, about masturbation, porn, guilt, all the shameful stuff that we don't like to talk about in our culture. And how she's learned to just be extremely candid with her husband now as she kind of for the first time in her 30s discovers her authentic sexuality. We have a funny little thing on 70s versus 90s porn, which I've thought about a lot. So it was kind of fun to have that conversation with someone who's noticed the same thing. And we talk about why the dominant image and dynamic of women needing to please men and get their approval in order to gain entrance into a sexual relationship is the opposite of reality, the opposite of biology in most animal species, including most humans. And how it's a really dangerous paradigm that upends nature and hurts girls, women, and boys and men, and everyone in between. And then we talk about Vicky's recent transition from embodying the maiden archetype to the mother archetype without having physically birthed children. So Yeah, I mean, the conversation about gender dynamics, I just want to, acknowledge that it's very much based on a male-female binary and on just sort of this toxic masculine and passive or performative feminine that we've kind of cultivated in this culture. And Vicky wanted me to say too that she talks about being addicted to porn, but she said she wasn't really addicted to it. It was more just like a fixation for a time. She didn't want to like downplay people who are actually physically addicted, which is a real thing. If you don't know, there's a really fascinating TED talk about how it rewires the brain just like any other addiction to like opiates or sugar. So Patreon, Vicky is giving away 2 amazing PDFs and she is giving away 2 herbal medicines. So let's talk about the PDFs. The first one is called A Year Renewed, Herbs, Reflections, and Recipes for Springtime. In it, she gives information like habitat, properties and actions, medicinal uses, how to harvest, and more on 4 of my favorite plants, nettle, violet, chickweed, and burdock, which are wild and abundant and are probably growing somewhere near you. And then the second PDF is the Red Tent. This is a 25-page full-color ebook that includes writings, art, and rituals from many, many different women, including me. This came out like 2 or 3 years ago, and I was really proud to be a part of it. So I thought I would just read a few of the things that are in there. Our friend Erin Rivera Merriman, who has a great podcast called the Starseed Survival Podcast. I've been on it, and I sure hope to have Erin on here at some point. She wrote in this ebook, "We have stopped burning our witches and wisdom keepers, yet we still suppress women's connection to her own body, nature, and the wild with disapproving glances. A great deal of a woman's power lies in her ability to be vulnerable, authentic, and messy. To step into that power, we need only to be courageous and allow ourselves to know what the body knows." It also includes a piece that Vicky wrote about herbs for moontime. And the piece that I wrote is sort of about embracing the darkness. And I'll just read a little bit from that. I say, embrace the darkness. Dive into your inner depths, just like I am encouraging you all to do through this podcast. Trust that the feelings that surface during your bleeding time reveal great wisdom about the truth at the center of your being. The darkness contains much needed rest, knowing that cannot be accessed in the light, and total acceptance of exactly who you are in this moment. Dive into your darkest recesses. Dive into your darkest recesses and find yourself there. So those are both available to download for Patreon subscribers at the $2 a month level. This is at patreon.com/medicine stories. I have almost 300 patrons there right now, and it's just making this possible. It really makes this possible. Thank you so much. Most of the money goes into childcare so that I can do this podcast, and I would really like to do it more often. I have so many ideas, so many guests written out and already booked. I'm booked like pretty far in advance usually, but I just cannot make it happen more than every other week right now, but I'd really like to do it more often. So hopefully as now 19-month-old Nixie grows and as the financial support grows, it'll be easier for her to spend more time with another caregiver and easier for me to spend more time rocking the podcast. Okay, so the giveaway, which is just available to anyone who's supporting on Patreon at any level. You don't have to enter or anything. Just if you're there, your name is in the hat to win. Vicky is giving away 2 herbal medicines. One is a salve called Sana Sana for aches and pains, and one is a manzanita flower essence for wisdom and confidence. And over at the Patreon, there is a post that will tell you more exactly about these medicines and exactly what ingredients are in them. So patreon.com/medicine stories, and this will end on Beltane, May 1st. Want to give people enough time to enter by becoming a patron if they want to. I know it usually takes me a couple days or a couple weeks to get to listening to new podcasts, so I'm going to give it some extra time there. And okay, before we get into it, I wanted to touch really quickly on something that Vicky says here, and we don't really get into it, but she talks about how having so many Instagram followers really freaked her out. And she kind of like just shut it down and stopped posting. And I've never had that experience where I get super freaked out by the number of people in my online realm. I really, really appreciate my connections online. It's so nourishing and beautiful. But what I do get really overwhelmed by, and I've spoken about this a few times on Instagram in stories, and I know a lot of my audience has heard me say this before, but this podcast has broadened my audience so much more than I ever expected. And I'm so grateful for it. But there's a lot of new people, and I feel like this is something that needs to be said again. And it's that I cannot respond to the vast majority of people who reach out to me. And it's not because like I'm so important and so many people want something from me. It's because I have kids, and especially the toddler. And my mind is already, as I spoke about in episode 11 on mothering without a village, my mind is so fractured in so many ways all day already. Oh, see, okay, look, Nixie just woke up. She's crying right now. I'm going to push pause real quick. Okay, I'm back. And that so perfectly illustrates what I'm talking about here. So I'm recording this intro in my 11-year-old daughter's room, which is next to the room that Nixie naps in. And it's like such a mess up here. And I had such a hard time even fitting this intro recording in. And I normally record my interviews and my intros in our next door neighbor's backyard studio space, but they're up right now. They're in town. So I had to find another place to do it. I don't have my own space to do it right now, although we're working on it. So I just have to always, with this show, with our herbal medicine making for Mythic Medicinals, for everything, I'm just trying to like cram my work life into my family life somewhere to make it fit somewhere. And it's so hard, and it hardly ever does. And with everything that I have to do as far as like taking care of the kids, and feeding everyone, which my husband does most of. So I thank you, Owen. You are a god. But just cleaning and keeping everything going, and then running the business and making the medicines and packaging them and sending them, and then doing this podcast, which I love doing more than anything. Like responding to people on the internet is just it cannot be my priority. I would never sleep. I would drive myself crazy. And it was really hard to slowly make this transition because, for years I just loved interacting with people online. I loved helping people. If I had something to suggest that would help them, I was so happy to do it always. And I do still find time to do that throughout the week. It's just random. I'll say that too. It's random. If like you've ever reached out to me and I didn't respond, that was random. If you reached out to me and I did respond, that was random too. It's like, do I have a free moment right now? Am I nursing the baby, looking at my phone, and like she's being really chill, so I totally have enough time to one-handedly send this response? Awesome. Or is she suddenly having a meltdown right when I'm in the middle of responding to someone and I just forget about it and never get back to it? Like, I just want people to know, because you guys, especially like that other folder on Instagram, I hardly even look at that thing anymore. And when I do, there's like dozens and dozens of new things. And I'm like just so overwhelmed by it. So sorry, not sorry. I'm sorry that we're not all living in like this small village type setting, like I talked about in that episode 11, where we can just really like heart to heart connect with people who share our interests and our values, because that's so fun and I love doing that. But I'm also not sorry that I am choosing to prioritize my health and the health of my family over making everyone happy. You know, I just can't do that. On Facebook, it drives me crazy because if I get a message from someone on my Facebook page, the Mythic Medicine page, like I'll get, you know, the notification or whatever telling me that I got it. And then Facebook within like the next hour will send me 3 more emails being like, hey, so-and-so is waiting for you. Hey, did you respond? I'm like, what? Oh my God, Facebook, like back off, you know? And then how they tell you too, when you look at someone's page, 100% response time usually responds within 5 minutes. I'm like, that's crazy. Mine's like 80% response time, usually responds within 24 hours or something. But like I got a message there recently that was just, what herbs cure diabetes? And I was like, I'm not going to respond to that. Like, first of all, none. It's a lifestyle or a genetic thing. Second of all, it's a super complex answer if you do want to talk about incorporating herbs, and not really my area of expertise at all. And thirdly, like, that was rude, you know? It's just not how you like ask strangers questions online. But Facebook's like, hey, you got to answer this person or we're gonna bring your response rating down. I'm like, please bring my response rating down. If it deters someone else from sending a message like that, go right ahead. But then yesterday on Facebook, I got someone asking me about books for grief, and like that's something that's close to my heart, so I was happy to respond to her. And now I'm feeling like at least someone out there is going to be like, what books for grief? So the first one is It's Okay That You're Not Okay by Megan Devine, Devine, and her whole website, which is refugeingrief.com. I just love her. I love everything she does. She's amazing. The second one is by Martine Prechtel, and it's called The Smell of Rain on Dust. Grief and praise, something. Those 2 words are in the title too. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. And then the third is by a guy named Francis something. It's called like The Wild Edge of Sorrow, I think. So that's what I answered her. That has been enough of a tangent now. I gotta go be with my baby who just took the world's shortest nap ever, because I probably woke her up by recording this up here. And that's my life. And thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to my rambles. Thank you for supporting me as a mom and someone trying to do a podcast. And I think you're really going to love this conversation with Vicky Salcido-Cobbe. Hello, Vicky, and welcome to the Medicine Stories podcast.
Hi, Amber. It's so fun to be here with you.
I am so happy you're here. It's pouring rain here. Is it raining there today?
It's not. It's been on and off. Yesterday it rained a little bit, but today it's kind of threatening rain all day, but we're praying for it.
Yeah.
Anytime.
Yeah, it's like a deluge here right now.
Oh.
All right, so I'm going to start the way I often start these conversations, because you have a lot to say about this. I want to hear about your name and about your names.
Oh. Yeah, I do. There's many names out there. Yeah. Okay, so most people, and most of my life, I think all of my life, I've been known as Vicky. And my actual full name is Ana Victoria Salcido-Cobbe, my married name. And I guess my mother's name is Victoria. And so when I was a little older, I asked her about our names, because one of my tias, one of my aunts, her name is also Ana, and my mom named her. So I asked her about, she must really like that name, Ana. And it turns out it was one of my mom's, or it is the name of one of my mom's really good friends who lives in San Francisco and is a nun. And so my name has this cool like symbolism of being my mom's best friend and her name put together, Ana and Victoria. And when I was a little girl, I guess everyone used to call me Lil Vicky. A lot of my tias still do. And my mom told me that I kind of like stole her name because my mom used to also be Vicky, and I was like, I want to be Vicky now. That's my name. And I, from as long as I can remember, that's always been what people call me. And I've tried to go, I really love the name Ana Victoria. I think it's really, really beautiful. I always joke that my sisters and I, we all have these like amazing soap opera, like Mexican soap opera names, but we all go by like these short versions that are like Vicky and Lily instead of Liliana, and but I really love the name. And I've tried to go by it, especially like when I moved to this new town. I was like, ooh, I can be whoever I want to be here. But when I introduce myself as Ana Victoria, people usually just start calling me Ana. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I think there's something about the pairing of the two names that really feels important to me. Like I'm either Ana Victoria or I'm Vicky. And I'm like, I'm not Ana and I'm not Victoria. It just feels like it's like one or the other. So I've kind of had, especially in my adult life, the last few years, this sort of like, I don't know, tickle in my back, like one day you're going to be Ana Victoria and it's going to naturally happen and you're going to step into that. And I'm like, all right, that sounds cool. But it's not quite yet, feels like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember being confused when we first met too, because we met through Instagram, and when you're just reading someone's name, you're not, I thought it was Anna too.
And it's funny because sometimes I like forget that it says that, on my email and stuff like that. People will be like, thank you, Anna. And I'm like, what? Oh yeah, that's my name.
Yeah. I met someone recently. It's funny. I'm not thinking of who it is now, but they had just corresponded with you. They were like, oh, I met Anna from Grandmother's Medicine. And I was like, who? Oh.
You're like, there's another Grandmother's Medicine. Yep, that's me.
Well,
and I really love the name. I just think it's so beautiful. And my tia, my aunt, her name is Ana Teresa, and she goes by Tere too, which is interesting, like a shortened version of her middle name. Mm-hmm. But it's fun to be that, like, I'm my mother's youngest, and I'm named Ana, and then my mother's youngest sister is also named Ana. So I think it's just a really sweet thing that my mom named us after this woman who maybe one day I'll meet. I don't know her.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's like Amy Woodruff in episode 6 said the same thing, that her middle name, Patrice, her mom named her after a woman who Amy never met, but is still living.
Yeah, and I mean, I wonder, yeah, and it's like this, I don't know, maybe a seed planted by our mothers, like something about that woman stuck with them, obviously, and it'd be fun to, now I'm inspired to like talk to my mom more about Anna and know her a little more.
Yeah, that sounds like an interesting life. And well, it kind of segues us, I guess, into my next question, because you mentioned San Francisco, where she lives as a nun, and you had a whole period of your life in San Francisco. And so I just want to hear more about what your life looked like at that time, and what was this moment when you realized that it had been enough and it was time to change.
Oof, yeah. Well, it's funny that I've never, ever thought about it like this, that my namesake, Anna, is in San Francisco as a nun. I don't know if she still is, but that was the last that I heard. And when I was living in San Francisco, I was doing things that would make nuns blush, very much so. But I'm at least, I don't really know astrology too well, but I'm at least a triple Pisces. So I feel really, really deeply on many, many levels. And I'm also the youngest, so I feel extra deeply. There's that little sister thing. And somewhere along my mid-20s, I had my first heartbreak, and it was completely devastating for me. And I didn't have really tools to deal with it, like at all. Like, I was raised on Disney, so I was like, this isn't supposed to happen. We're supposed to live happily ever after. What's the deal? So anyway, when this heartbreak happened, I just, I didn't have any tools. I had no idea how to face it. I had no idea, what it meant. And so I was working retail at the time, and I just basically was like, I want a job somewhere that's not here. Everything here reminds me of this relationship, and I want out. So if you find something, let me know. And then a position opened up in South San Francisco, and I got the job. And it was like, I interviewed Friday, and they're like, can you start on Monday? And I was like, no, but I can start on Friday. And it was like I'd never left. I've never really left San Diego, where I was from. So I moved up there with this bat out of hell thing, like just escaping as quickly as I could. And that really ended up being like the setup for the 3 years of my life. I built this story that I was like starting over and like, oh, I'm going to learn who I am and I'm going to do this. But like, reflecting back on it, especially now, I really know that what I was doing up there was just trying to do everything I could to just forget and not deal. And that included swallowing pills and snorting things and smoking things and drinking things and, just doing a lot of things that, I don't know, just it made sense to me at the moment. Numbing, I guess. It was just like, it was what was there for me and what seemed to quote work. And near the end, there was a couple things, but near the end of my time in San Francisco, it basically was like my body was essentially yelling at me like, no more, please stop. And I never really had like a close connection with my body. It was just a thing that carried me through my life. I'm very cerebral a lot of times and emotional. And so my body was unwell in like many, many levels. And again, instead of really knowing any tools to look at it or having any peers or mentors or whatever, I started upping my drinking a lot. I was drinking a lot by myself. And it was kind of, drinking is like this, well, for me at least, it was just this steady flow of like, I don't know, like sometimes it would lift me up. Sometimes it would be my way to escape sorrow. It was just like every range of anything except for actually dealing with what was going on in my life. And I got to the point where I was like, I was living with my cousin, one of my best friends, and I had all these really wonderful friends that were just so supportive and sweet, and they knew something was wrong with me, but I didn't know how to vocalize anything. And they'd be there for me, and I would just like literally be looking them in the eye when there's like a room of a bunch of my friends that are like, how can we help? And I'm like, nobody's helping me. Mm-hmm. And the reality was like, I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't know that I needed help. I didn't want to believe that I needed help. And I remember the specific day where we had a group of friends all together, and we had gotten this big fight because I was just like, this is all bullshit and nobody gets it and blah, I was just yelling at everybody. And I left and I went to the liquor store and I bought a tall can, and I just like found myself in this alleyway, like semi close to my house. And I sat down and was just drinking and just sobbing, like really realizing I hadn't cried in a long time. And then suddenly I look up in between this tiny crack of city, these two really tall buildings in San Francisco, and the moon kind of peeked over the horizon and of this building. And it was just this moment of like, whoa, like what's that? Like it was like something that took me out of my sorrow, and it took me out of my pity, and it took me out of this like spiraling sadness that I was in. And it wasn't like I saw this light and was like, oh, and everything's better. But it was like almost like a, like a grandmother oak or like an abuelita, like smack, like, hey, like that's enough of that. Something needs to change, and it needs to change now. And then because I was in this alleyway, the moon very quickly passed over and then was gone. And I was kind of like dumbfounded. I remember I was like, whoa, and the beer didn't taste good to me anymore. And I don't know, I didn't know what that meant to me. I didn't know what that was, but I knew that I guess it was one of the first times I really remember hearing a voice that wasn't like a human voice, a voice outside of my friends, my family. It was this like deep wisdom that was inviting me, or not inviting, kind of demanding me, like to wake up to the reality of what I was doing to myself and my body. And I remember I stumbled home that day and was kind of in shock and went to bed. And within a few days, I was like, I didn't know how to process that. I didn't have any tools. I hadn't been told many stories at all about like mysticism or messages or anything like that. In fact, I'd been a little bit afraid of like ghost stories and spirits, and so I didn't have any tools to really process this like really special experience. And so I kind of spiraled even deeper mm-hmm. and I fell into this darkness. And I remember having this like panic attack in my work, and I checked into a hospital and was like, I can't breathe. I'm having a panic, or like, I'm sick. My heart is like stopping. My heart's not working anymore. I'm having a heart attack. And they're like, you're having a panic attack. And I'm like, that's not a thing, mm-hmm. But it eventually led me to to quit my job and leave my house and just get in a car and drive north. I didn't know why, but it was one of the first times I really followed an intuition that wasn't escaping, that something really bigger than me was telling me like it was time to go. And I left, and I didn't leave very gracefully. I kind of burned a lot of bridges, and it wasn't really sweet, but I guess I'll just end it by saying, I ended up having kind of my second, but maybe first most profound experience with nature, in that, like, I grew up in the suburbs in a cul-de-sac. So a lot of buildings, and we had like parks nearby and stuff, but I never really had like this big wow nature factor, in my life. And I remember I was crossing over the California-Oregon border into Oregon. I was heading to Portland, and I kind of had this moment of realization. I had been telling myself all these lies as to why I was going to Oregon, but I definitely had a reason I was going that I didn't want to know to be true. And I remember turning a corner, and there was this turnout basically, and I felt really like I have to physically, I cannot drive anymore. I must turn out immediately. And I turned out, and I kind of like walked down this little ravine a little bit. And after, I was just so in my head, like, what am I doing? And then I had this, like, again, like kind of the spiritual smack where it was like, look, and I opened my eyes and I looked up, and it was just like trees as far as the eye could see. These elders that just were standing there and witnessing me and calling me. And I was like in such shock that something could be so supportive and so prevalent, and that I could just be blind to it. And I dropped to my knees, and I just yelled all the things I needed to yell and all the names I needed to yell, and all the forgiveness I needed to forgive, and the curses I needed to throw. And I just like expressed all the things that I maybe was stopping myself from doing by numbing myself with all these things. And it was just like, I mean, I must have been there for like an hour, I think, or maybe longer, but I was just like, blah! And then I stopped. I finally felt like done. And I just was like, I felt like myself again. I felt like this haze had been lifted, and I was in absolute and utter shock that, like, I'd been looking so long for a person, a companion, somebody to help, quote, fix me, a doctor, a therapist, a boyfriend, a something, and nature ended up being the best listener and the best supporter and the best just guide in that time. And I just, like, I don't know, it wasn't immediate for me, but I know for sure that was the moment that I committed myself to the plants, to nature. It's pretty special.
Yeah, I love hearing this story and knowing more of your background. I'm realizing that I didn't know any of this about you at all. I guess I sort of assumed that you were always this like nature girl, always on the path. You're so deeply immersed in herbalism and in gardening. Your knowledge is so vast, and it reminds me so much of my own life path and what my life looked like in my early 20s, especially, just completely lost. And I think about how many of us go through this, but we're just so spiritually bereft, so deeply cut off from nature and from our ancestors and from these things that have always sustained humanity. But right now, at this point in the West, we think are bullshit. We give no credence to, we give no respect to, we don't give our attention, our time, our reverence to anymore. And then we end up abusing substances, having severe anxiety, not knowing who we are anymore.
No. And it's interesting that you said this disconnect from ancestry, because, like, I want to just say I had a very loving family. I have a very loving family. And I was raised in San Diego, in North County, San Diego, and I went to mostly these schools that, they were divided into tracks, but the people that I hung out with were like these SoCal, like, surfers and skaters. And I really wanted to be wearing like Roxy, and I wanted to be American, quote, American, what I thought at the time is like white. I believe that concept of like whiteness is sort of a myth. There's so many cultures involved in that, but now that's what I believe now. But back then it was like, I want to be white. I don't want to be Mexican. I don't want to be, I was so like, ugh, I have to go to a quinceañera. Like none of my friends go to quinceañeras. Like, ugh, I have to go to mass in Spanish. Like none of my friends do that. Like, why can't we have like casserole? Why are we having enchiladas? You know? And so it was like this weird thing where I was so disconnected from my culture. And my mom is one of 14. We have like a really huge family just on my mom's side. But we're the only family, I mean, we had one other cousin at the time too, but nowadays we're the only family that moved to San Diego. Everybody else lives in Los Angeles. So all my cousins were like intimately involved with like each other. They were going to each other's, first communions and baptisms and quinceañeras and parties and, immersed in Mexican culture with the music. And, my whole family came from Mexico. And so they were really immersed in it. And I really wasn't. And it's not like to the fault of anybody. I was also the youngest, and I don't know. I just really wanted to be white. There was something about me that really wanted that. So this is really interesting, Amber, because I'm realizing as of yesterday, I literally just yesterday realized like, I don't really have, experience with elders. Like I didn't grow up with my grandmothers. One of my grandmothers lived in Mexico growing up, and one of my other grandmothers lived in LA, and we'd see her every few months, but I didn't really grow up with elders. So I think about these things now, I can reflect on that time in my life and say like, no real, like definitely no intimate connection with elders. No cultural connection. I mean, not no, but like a lack of a strong cultural connection. Of course I'm going to be lost. And we had this beautiful garden, and, my mom and dad always love nature, but it was just different. It was very like, of course, I had no tools, and I had no, wherewithal to handle, but I didn't have these stories. I didn't have that. And that's not to blame anybody. It's like, oh, that's very interesting. I think about my nieces and nephews a lot and how I'd like to support them and having tools for the future.
Yeah. And I mean, it's hard for everyone in this culture, maybe especially females, and maybe especially Southern California females. That's a really hard culture to come up in. I've spent a lot of time there, especially when I was younger, and Roxy wearing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, homogenous.
Yeah,
and not anymore. Like definitely not anymore. And I also should say I grew up like just east of a beach town, so of course it's like it's different. Like I go to San Diego now, and it's like, oh, it's like amazing. There's so much vibrancy and so many people celebrating their culture and events, and it's shifting. But I think that's really like nationally and internationally, really like people are starting to reclaim that in a really good way. I remember when I think in one of your interviews, I think with Mila, you were like, I'm glad that ancestry is a buzzword. That's great. And I feel the same.
Yeah. Yeah. We were talking about people who are like, oh, ancestry is so trendy now. It's like, no, it's just like the most human thing.
Yeah.
So that's interesting that you say that you were kind of cut off from your grandmothers, although you knew them. And then I wanted to ask you at the beginning too, but the name of your business is Grandmother's Medicine, which I think is just so beautiful and perfect. And so like, what's that? Why is it named that? What's that connection? And then can you tell me about your maternal grandfather also?
Yes. Okay, so Grandmother's Medicine, originally it started out when I was living in San Diego with a really dear friend of mine named Dina. And Dina and I were just so obsessed with herbs. We were like, this is amazing. Yeah. Dina was a young mother. I was just like, this is so cool. So we would just like hang out and like make things together. And she introduced me to like my first ever like Facebook group of herbalists and started like connecting with other people.
Yeah. So wait, I feel like I should have asked you how you transitioned from that like roadside in Oregon into herbalism.
Yeah. Well, actually, I mean, I was like, it's a long story, but it's actually not really. I from this roadside in Oregon, I found my way to a friend of a friend's home, and just did whatever I needed to do in Portland. But one of the things that happened was I got really, really sick when I was up there. I had a really bad flu. And I also, right before I left, I don't think I've ever gone on record to share this, but it's like, well, duh, Vicky, everybody does at this point. But I had just gotten a diagnosis of HPV. And so that was a big part of the spiraling of like, nobody's ever going to love me. I'm bleh, I'm just so gross. And I had all these like hangups about sexuality already that were like really, really, really old. So it was kind of like the beginning of that downward spiral. So I got really sick and I went to a clinic in Portland, and I think it was in the southeast quadrant. I'm like trying to, because somebody's asked me like, what's it called? The community clinic, I think. And I went in because I had like a flu. But then I also shared with the practitioner that I had just gotten an HPV diagnosis. And, you know, I shared my fears with her, and she was just incredible. She was so kind and so sweet and supportive. And she kind of like started explaining to me like, you know, and I told her, I don't want to take any pills. I don't want to do this, da, 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 da. And I don't know why I didn't want to. Like, I grew up taking pills. Like, it was, you know, it wasn't like I had this, like, I'm anti-pharmaceuticals at all. I just, in that moment, I think just didn't want anything. And she introduced this woman, I should really get her name, but she introduced herbs to me, and she started explaining that you can take herbs as herbal medicine. And I was like, what? And she walks away, she comes back, and it turns out that this clinic is an integrated health clinic. And she brought me a bottle of tincture. And it was my first ever experience with herbalism. I'm looking at the tincture bottle right now. I brought it because it's totally like my roots. And she gave this to me, and it's an antibacterial tincture that has echinacea, usnea, mahonia, baptista, and licorice root. Wow. But
so mahonia is Oregon grapefruit. And what's baptista?
Yeah.
Is there a common name?
Wild indigo.
Oh yeah.
No, they all just wild indigo.
Okay.
But I've never noticed this, but it's October 2009. So sometime in October 2009, Vicky's herbalism was born. But I walked away from this clinic just totally in awe. And she also gave me a list of a couple of stores I could go to in Portland that's, you know, like apothecaries essentially. And at the time they were mostly just teas because there wasn't that many apothecaries. And I visited some, and I started reading books, and I just was like, just in awe. And I think this, you know, completely correlates to like this realization I had with the trees of like, oh, nature has got your back, like in a way that no human ever could. And I had never really had that realization. Like, I hear a lot of times people have stories about like a special tree or a special rock. Like, I didn't really have that growing up. So it was like this, like, oh, like, yeah, nature's got my back, like physiologically, mentally, spiritually, in all these ways. So I just rocked on with it, and I love it. And it's just in our everyday life now. And then you asked me about my grandpa, my abuelito secundino, my tata. He is living in Mexico. My mom and her family, they're all from El Valle de Guadalupe, which is in Jalisco, and it's a small ranch town. And he is the father of 14 children. My grandmother, the mother of 14 children. And he is a healer. Not so much anymore. My grandpa is actually almost, he's losing his vision, and he has macular degeneration. And I remember when I was little, like, because he used to live in Los Angeles with my grandma and some of my tias. And I remember when I was little that people would come over like limping. So he's what in the Curan, or like the Mexican culture, you'd call a sobador, which is basically a body worker. I just found out that he actually, I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I just found out that he might have also been a huesero, which is like a chiropractor kind of. But I remember people coming over, like it'd be Thanksgiving, or, you know, someday we'd be at my grandparents' house, and people would be coming over and they'd be like limping. They would need support on both sides, carrying them to this bench that he had, or this, it was like a mantle, I guess. It was like in front of the fireplace that was always full of boxes. Like, nobody actually used it, but had this blue cushion, and people would lay on it. And oh my gosh, I just remember these like agonizing screams of pain, you know. And I was like, what's my grandpa doing to that person? And it was just this thing, like, you know, people would be screaming. And like, it's so funny when you get like un buen sobada, like people think like, oh, massage in the West is so relaxing. But like a lot of times when you get like a good work from a sobador, it's like, you know, it hurts sometimes. He's putting you back into place, basically. And I, as a young girl, remember people walking in, needing support on both sides, screaming and writhing in pain. I never actually watched, I don't think. And then walking out the door without any need for help or support. So he is a healer. And that never really struck me like, wow, that's amazing, until I went to Mexico maybe 5 or 6 years ago for the first time ever, where my mom grew up. I got to see the house, she grew up in, and the ranch that my grandpa owns. And a little boy came over, and he had like a bad ankle. He was limping really bad, and he was really young. He was maybe like 1.5 years old. And I actually got this on tape secretly, a video, but my grandpa was just talking to him and, working his ankle and asking him where it hurt, and kind of really gently massaging it and moving it around and just kind of doing his thing. And then this little boy just walked out the door, like just totally fine. And the last time we went to Mexico last year, I finally started asking my grandpa about herbs. He has like a stash of herbs on top of his refrigerator, which is hilarious because like all modern herbalists are like, never keep herbs high. They'll spoil with the heat, and you look at these herbs and a lot of them are like super brown and all this stuff. But he has these herbs and he uses them, and he was trying to share some. And I was like amazed that actually some of these herbs that he uses are a lot of the herbs that are all around Russ, my husband Russ's childhood home, that he uses for joint pain but I just am barely kind of scratching the surface of understanding that my grandfather is also a healer and an herbalist.
Wow.
So there is a connection in that lineage.
Yeah. How exciting to have all that discovery ahead of you.
Yeah, it is exciting.
So how about the name Grandmother's Herbalism?
Oh, yeah. So Dina and I, my good friend Dina and I were, I think we were like texting back and forth, and it was this total, like, this is so funny because this is like, I was just thinking about this with the first day of spring that just passed, where sometimes it's become like a thing where herbalists are like, okay, well, there's like an equinox discount now. And, it's like this like thing that we have to announce things on equinoxes or full moons or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember it was like a Pisces full moon was coming up, and we had to announce it on the Pisces full moon. It was so important because then if we didn't, we'd have to wait till the next full moon, right? But and at the time it was like, oh, it's so important. So we were like texting back and forth all these names, and it was like grandmother's wisdom, grandmother da-da-da. And it wasn't always grandmother's, but it was all these words. And then somehow, I think it was Dina, it like grandmother's medicine. And we both were just like, yeah, like, that sounds fantastic. Let's go with that. Because that's what we felt. It's like, this stuff isn't new. This isn't some like newfangled knowledge. This is stuff that's been carried for a really long time. And it's really funny because I've had an interesting relationship with this name. Like, it's interesting hearing you, like, I love it, it's perfect. Because I've always felt like it was slightly like a rushed name. I've always felt a little slightly divorced from the name because like I didn't have grandmothers that like taught me herbalism, but then I would have these moments where I'd be talking to the trees about it, and the trees are like, psh, we're your grandmothers and we're teaching you herbalism. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm. And then, but yeah, there's, and then I even was like advised by my lawyer friend, like, oh, I don't know the word medicine, talking about all the legal stuff that's happening right now. Mm-hmm. And it's really funny that you're like, this is perfect because we're actually putting grandmother's medicine to bed. And we can talk about that if you want, or
yeah. Are you going to keep releasing medicines, but under a different name?
I think so. So a while back, I had this sort of habit of like having these like, oh no, I have a lot of stage fright, I guess I should say, in various forms. And this sounds really silly because people are like, when I tell people this, they're like, that's like a really good thing. I'm like, okay, the fact that I gained this like big following on social media, last year, it freaked me out. It like really, really freaked me out. I felt like I didn't have, the right. I didn't have, it freaked me out. So I kind of fell off the radar, and what was the account for grandmother's medicine, I had this long held vision for a collective for a really long time. And I didn't know what it looked like. I don't know. I just like, I love working with people, like, mainly because everyone has this like amazing creative brilliance, but also because I get, burnt out, like for real. I get really burnt out. I get really stressed. I feel a lot of pressure when it's all just me. So I know like for my wellness, I needed to partner more. So I had this vision for a collective and was trying to plant seeds. And one day I was laying in bed and I was just like asking the goddess, like, what is this? And right before I fell asleep, I heard this little whisper, and it was La Tierra Buena Collective, which means the Good Earth Collective. And part of this prayer that I was asking for was, I love herbalism. I also love gardening. I also love soil and vegetables and fruit and mycelium. And I love restoration work, and I love cob building, natural, like more things than just this category. And I felt like grandmother's medicine was so limiting, I suppose, to this like herbal world. I also am like a little bit of, sometimes I have this little punk rock nature of like, I don't want to just be this herbalist. I want to be lots of things, But La Tierra Buena Collective came back to me. I changed this like social media world and then just disappeared, just kind of fell off the face of social media and started like another grandmother's medicine account, like disappeared, like not knowing really what I was doing. I was like, oh God. And then about 2 weeks ago, again, before I fell asleep, I kind of got this whisper that it was time to bring it back. And anybody who knows me knows that in the last 2 to 4 months, I've really taken many, many steps to reclaim my ancestry, to connect to it again, listen to the music and eat the food and speak the language. And La Tierra Buena, the good earth, really represents many aspects of that for me. It's in my tongue. It's all encompassing of what I consider to be my spiritual practice, which is the good earth, all the earth. And it's a collective eventually. It's a prayer for a collective, I should say. So yeah, grandmother's medicine, it never really felt like mine, it never really felt, it felt like it always was something that was going to be composted. And I kind of like it, I've talked about this with a few people a lot of times, like, I don't want to get rid of, I want to lay it to bed, but I never felt right. And I just did a little product launch of grandmother's medicine with some products that I made for the first time in like months. And this is going to be the last of that launch under that name. But I don't know if I'm going to make herbal remedies, to answer your other question. I love, love, love making herbal remedies. But yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I don't fit into like the world of herbal remedies. I really want to work more towards education and eventually being like a bilingual clinician is my big, big dream.
Yeah, I mean, as we've been talking about in the Facebook group Herbal Medicine Business Owners, and more people are talking about, it's really like an unsustainable model to be mass producing herbal medicines. And I think so many of us, our heart is really in teaching people to make their own, and more so teaching people to have their own relationships and connections with the plants and with the earth around them.
Because there's also this whole like, both my parents are from Mexico, and I'm a trained Western European herbalist, And so that's another aspect of it, of like what's growing around you. Like when I moved up to where I'm living now, it was like, oh my gosh, like there's herbs everywhere here. I don't actually need to buy herbs from these large companies. I can make remedies from our gardens and from the wild. And that was really like eye-opening to me of like, oh, what about everybody else? Like what about just teaching the basic concepts and then encouraging relationships to your local biosphere, your local ecosystem, your local world. So yeah, like the unsustainability of the model for many things, like the actual like, fossil fuel and water usage, that I'm always like that guy, like, hey, like talking about, of like shipping and labels and production, the unsustainable potential of the harvesting, the over harvesting, and also the reality of like, you can make like a quart of herbal oil for like $40. And because of all my expenses on my side, I have to sell 4 ounces for $40. You know what I mean? So it's always felt like this is such an interesting thing, because to me, herbalism was so empowering. It was the way that I reclaimed myself on many levels, like my physical health, my emotional health, my mental balance. It was really a way that I was able to reclaim myself. So kind of like, I don't know, sometimes I feel like I'm the one that carries the remedies and you have to buy them from me,
Mm-hmm.
and that feels it feels a little weird to me. And of course, there's always going to be space for healers and like, localizing and there's that's every single community has always had that, right? Like the local healer. That's like that's my grandfather. People come to him to be healed. Not so much anymore, but they used to, and if they paid him, they paid him. And if they didn't, they didn't. It wasn't like, okay, come to my store and buy these things so you can be well. It was like, here are these things. I'm a healer. We don't charge for this.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another interesting dynamic I've been thinking a lot about.
Yeah. I love that you talk about all these things and really have been focused on like sustainability in medicine making for a long time. Okay. I'm just getting over a little cold. Sorry about the coughing. Yeah, it's been rough having a baby sick and then being sick too.
Oh, Nixie got sick.
Yeah, she got it first. Poor thing. It's been tragic.
I always feel so bad when there's sick babies. Yeah, it's like all you could do is like hug them and love them and like, I mean, tend to them obviously, but like, I love you. Please get better.
Yeah, there was a whole day where she couldn't nurse at all because her nose was so stuffed up. So she's like not able to nurse and get that comfort. And I'm like, this milk is medicine. I wish you could drink it.
Just like squirt it all over her. No. Is that how it works? I don't know. I'm not a mom.
Yeah, I could. I definitely, you can like squirt it up their nose to kind of break up the mucus. I think I did that with my oldest.
Oh.
Okay, so it really is. I want to shift gears a little bit. There's so much that we could talk about, but okay, you said the funniest thing. First of all, you're one of the funniest people I know. You make me laugh all the time. You laugh all the time. Listen to you now. You are always laughing, and it's so. I'm just like happy whenever I'm with you.
Oh, that's so nice. That's so nice to hear. The other day I did an interview with at the local radio station. We were talking about the Mendocino County Herb Guild, and she was like doing the audio level, and she's like, okay, everything sounds good. And she made a joke and I laughed. She's like, whoa, okay, we got to adjust some of that belly laughter. I was like, oh, sorry. I just won't laugh. She's like, no, please laugh.
Yeah. I mean, so many herbalists can at least appear super self-serious, and like, you don't even appear that way. You're just always lighthearted and fun, and I just appreciate it so much. So you wrote something that made me laugh so hard when we were preparing for this interview. So I was asking about dreams, and you said, "Oh yeah, okay." This is your husband. Your husband is named Russ, and you said, Russ would wake up and tell me a fantastical, lucid journey he took with eagles and futuristic landscapes and mountains, and I'd be like, I dreamt I was in the self-checkout at Walmart and it wasn't working, and I was so frustrated and no one would help me.
This happens like multiple times.
Yeah.
And like I would find myself like before we wake up, like, okay, did I have a really cool dream? Because I know Russ is gonna tell me this like amazing. He was like riding on the back of a griffin or something, and I was like, oh, like I was at the DMV, and it was really frustrating.
Yeah, so I love that because first of all, me too. Like most of my dreams are stupid like that. And a lot of them like revolve around clothes and not being able to find the right outfit to wear, or not being able to like nail my outfit in time for something that's really important. Or last week I had one where I was out of my control, moving in slow motion, trying to get dressed and being like, I'm not going to make it to this event. And Amy Woodruff said the same thing. I don't know if she said it in our interview or before to me or in writing or something, that, her partner Augustine is like, I was on a crystal in hyperspace. And she's like, I have like high school social anxiety dreams.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I have a lot of those too.
Yeah. And then
it's so funny. And it's, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, just the night before I read you saying this, I was reading Robert Moss's book, Conscious Dreaming, and he has these insane dreams, like Russ's and Augustine's, that were really developed, he thinks, by having double pneumonia, I think like 11 times before he was 10 years old. So he had this crazy, feverish, like out-of-body childhood, and he's this really intense dreamer now and writes these amazing dream books. But he has this whole thing, and like most dreams are mundane, like most life is mundane, so of course our dreams are going to reflect that. And like, there's nothing wrong with you if you're not having these hyperdimensional dreams.
Oh, thank goodness. That's good to hear. No, you know what's funny? It's like, I remember hearing you're like, I won't talk about boring dreams. I'm like, well, I'm out of that one then. But then I started thinking because of that question, you're like talking about the dreams, and I started thinking about like how much of life has so much meaning in these like really mundane moments, you know, like if you really wanted to carve something out of like, you know, standing in line at the self-checkout and being frustrated, you really can, like, okay, what is the root of this? It might just be, you know, your psyche explaining that you're frustrated today or something. But I also have been having a lot of fun challenging myself as like, this isn't a boring dream. What is this dream trying to tell me? I would say like 80% of the time it's like nothing. It was a boring dream. But sometimes I can find a little meaning out of it.
Yeah, it came from your mind. Like there's something there that's reflective of you.
Totally. I made it to the dream conversation. Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, when I look back to like the big dreams that have guided my life, there's 3 of them, you know? So like 99.9% of my dreams are stupid and boring and embarrassing and weird. And then there's been like 3 big ones.
I have a lot of dreams, I think, that are like, I would consider like, oh, that's so weird. Or what is that dream? Why is that? You know what, lately, especially, and I'm doing a lot of work with like, I have very little memory of my life, my childhood. And that could have been from substances I snorted up my nose, but it could have also been blockages, you know, purposeful or otherwise. And trauma's blocked out. And I've been doing a lot of work of like asking people like stories about me, or like what's the music we used to listen to together, and like listening to these albums again and looking at old pictures. And I'm trying to like call back these memories. I mean, I'm open to them coming back. So I've been having all these dreams lately about people that I have not thought about in, you know, a decade or more. And it's been really interesting, like who is showing up again in my dreams, like every now and again. And I don't really know. I'm like, why are you there? But I'll write it down. Like, this person was in my dream, and maybe I'll remember why. Like maybe there's a memory or a moment that's significant, and that specific person is coming back to me.
Yeah.
So I have some cool dreams. I totally have some cool dreams.
Yeah. No, that's like visitations and dreams are a pretty big deal, especially when it's someone you haven't seen or thought about in a long time.
Oh yeah. They've been showing up. They're like, hey,
remember me?
Yeah.
So I love how vulnerable you've been through this conversation. Like, I just think you've shown a lot more of like the hard stuff, you know, than a lot of people are comfortable with. And so you wrote this whole thing when we were preparing about like the evolution of your sexuality. And I was thinking like, that's not something we've talked about at all on this show yet. And that is such a part of all of our lives. And I just related with so much of what you had to say. Are you willing to talk? Obviously you are. So go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always been like this, like open book in some sense, but then and then I said like I get all pressured and I'm like and I must retreat. But I was like the type of like young female that was like, or young person that was like on like Live Journal. I don't know if anybody remembers Live Journal. You know, these like essentially they were like online journals, and I would just like share all the feelings online. I wouldn't really share like specific stories of myself, but I would like leave my diary out a lot. Like, ooh, I hope somebody reads this. Like it was, I don't know why. Like I find it so interesting to like share the most intimate parts of myself. And sometimes it gets me in trouble. People are like, you don't need to share that. And I'm like, but why? It's so interesting to me. Like, but yeah, like, especially lately as I'm doing this work of like trying to reclaim myself and who I am as a person, and working through this like personal stuff of like, you know, having this like social media following is like, it's easy to turn yourself into like a brand or like a persona. And so I've been like really challenging myself to be a person all the time as much as possible. And like been doing a lot of speaking for like the guild, and it's like, oh, I'm like a representative, but it's like, so I've been really trying to challenge myself. And I think the timing of this interview worked out really well, because I don't know that I would have been so raw a few months ago when you first asked me. But yeah, so that's just like a little segue into what I'm trying to say is like, it's possible. Like, I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Well, and you said no when I
sexual-
first asked you, because you were like, I'm in something right now, and I need some time to figure out what I'm in.
Yeah, and you're so awesome because you're like, that's fine, whenever you're ready, girl. And I mean, it took me like months to be like, okay, I'm ready. I feel ready, because I have been in something, but I very recently feel like my voice has come back to me in like a good, authentic way, where I'm not just like, blah, making things up and speaking in circles, which I'm pretty good at sometimes. But in terms of the sexuality aspect of my life, or aspects or whatever, let me see how I want to kind of approach this. Yeah, so I grew up as a Mexican Catholic little girl. I did, baptism, communion, and all these things. And there's probably a lot of people out there who have strong Catholic guilt. It's just in there. You're trained as a little kid that, you're inherently sinful. You've done things wrong, especially if you're a woman. You're the reason we've all fallen, because you just couldn't get your hand off that apple, right? But there is this like inherent sin, and I just to like illustrate this point and how deeply this runs in me, I remember before you get your first communion, your primero comunión, you have to do a confession. That's like a required part of the sacrament. And they talk to us about what a confession in Sunday school. They talk to us about what a confession is and what it means. And I was a really good little girl. Like, I was a very, very good little girl. My number one priority was like to have fun and to be good. Like, I didn't want to stir the pot like at all. And I remember the night before my confession, I couldn't sleep. I didn't sleep very much because I was trying so hard to rack my brain for the things that I had done that were wrong, so I could have something to confess, because I was supposed to confess, because I'm inherently sinful and I need to be blessed, and I need to have some man behind a screen tell me like, it's okay, God still loves you. So that was like so deeply rooted in my consciousness, and so much so that sex was not a thing. Like, I'm one of 4 girls, and my dad is like our best friend. He's so sweet and loving and fun, and my mom is just amazing, and we just didn't talk about sex. Like, it just was never ever a thing that we talked about. And I don't know, like, I think the only thing I knew about sex was that you do it to have children when you're married. Like, it was one of these things. Like, certainly had no concept of sex as pleasure at all. And so I do remember as a young girl being aroused a lot, like, like liking the way it felt to touch myself. I remember getting caught like touching myself, and it was like, ew, somebody told me I was gross. I remember another time I was touching myself, probably absentmindedly in the car. I like had this clear memory when I was doing a psychotherapy session with Rhiannon Morsch, and I was like, whoa, I had totally forgotten this memory where I had my hand, I was touching myself, and somebody was sitting in the front seat, turned around and happened to see me and smacked my hand and was like essentially said, like, that's bad. You don't do that. And I was like, oh, okay. And I'm like 7 years old, maybe 6, I don't know. And I think 7. And then somewhere along the line, a young man in my life he was only about 2 years older than me. We were both really young. He also was sexually active and curious, and we essentially started playing doctor. And it was cool, and I liked it. It was fun. It was like, oh, and we never went too far, but it was like definitely this like, oh, this actually does feel good, and it was fun. Like, it was pleasurable. It felt good. And we got caught one time, or actually, I don't even think we got caught, like, quote, in the act, but somebody in my family pulled me aside and said, I know what you're doing. It's wrong and it's bad. And they were a peer of mine. It's wrong and it's bad and you're gross. I heard the word cochina a lot, which in Spanish kind of means like filthy, like little piggy, like bad. So I actually feel like every time I got caught in some sort of like pleasuring myself sexually as a young child, I heard the word cochina. So I like instantly connected like sexuality and pleasure with like naughtiness, bad, gross. And so when I was told by this person in my family that was bad and I know what you're doing, I suddenly got this, oh, this is wrong. Like this isn't pleasurable. I'm not supposed to be doing this. This is bad. And so then I told this boy that I didn't want to be doing this anymore. And then he called me cochina, and he told me that if I didn't do this, that he was going to tell my grandmother, he was going to tell my mom. So it went from this consent-based pleasure fun thing with kids to this like threatening abuse. And then so we did another act, and I cried. I remember crying and saying these things that like no little girl should have to say. And then at the end of that, no little person, I should say, should have to say. And at the end of that, I stood up for myself, and I made sure that I was never alone with this boy again. And he never forced me to do anything after that. It was like that one time, but that's all it really took for me. Because from then on out, sex and pleasure became gross, bad, forced, unpleasant, all of these things that were just dark. And so I shut myself completely out from sexuality as a little girl. And through middle school, I remember a friend of mine did a naughty deed with a boy she liked, and I was like, I don't even know you anymore. You don't have any self-respect. And I like cut her out of my life because she was so bad. I was very self-righteous, and I was very like, that's bad. You only do that with the approval of God when you're married. And it was just this whole like persona I built up around myself. And I, like later on in middle school, I was like watching scrambled porn, like and into it. And I was like 13 years old, and I'd be like on channel 99 and like, whoa, that's interesting. But then we went into high school, and high school's a totally different time. And, like I had my first boyfriend, and like it was just a shifting thing. And I mostly hung out with a lot of guys. Like I get along with guys a lot. And I remember this one time we were at our friend's house, and it was a party, and he or somebody like put pornography on the computer, and it was like this totally weird like 16-year-old boy thing to do, but then we all were like really into it. But it wasn't like we were like getting off on it. We like all went to the computer, and we were like doing like commentary and like laughing about it and drinking and whatever. But something in that moment was like ding ding ding, oh, like this is turning me on. This does feel good. I'm not going to like express it here in this moment, but that's really interesting that this exists like in the internet and in the world. And I kind of, I went home, and this is the time of like dial up, and like, the computer is like in the room next to your parents' room. And, it's like a totally different time than it is now. And I remember I would like sneak into the computer room and start looking up pornography, and I started masturbating to these scenes. And I don't know. I have this theory that like 90s pornography and modern pornography is just like it's like so awful. It's like so awful. And that's so a general scary statement.
No, it's terrible. It's so scary raising girls right now. I tell my 11-year-old, like, the boys that you meet in the future, this is going to be what they think sex is.
Yeah. Well, and this is exactly what I thought sex was. This was my only ever training in what sex was. Nobody talked to me about sex. Nobody talked to me about consent or pleasure or anything like that. So, like in this like 90s and modern pornography, it's all about getting the guy off. And I was very like, oh, like taking notes, not literally, but I was like, oh, I'm supposed to be so turned on by getting this performance based. There you go. And thank you. I was about to get really graphic. And, performance based, yes. And there wasn't pleasure, like there wasn't any. So that's how I approached my sexuality. I didn't lose my virginity till my first boy. It was very like, I want to be in love again, Disney. And but even then, like, and all the times in San Francisco, and like my expression of sexuality had nothing to do with healing or pleasure or something that was good. Essentially, it was all just performance based. And I got addicted to pornography. I got addicted to seeking out moments where I felt self-worth in pleasing a man, kind of thing. And it was really, I'm just realizing like how harmful that was. I remember this moment, like, I don't know, maybe this was only like 7 years ago, where a friend of a friend was talking about sex, and she explained this concept of like the yoni, the vagina, being a portal, a sacred portal. And I was like, she was like, every person that you let enter the portal leaves a piece of their energy. And I was like, oh my God, it's like, oh no. And the concept itself blew my mind. Nobody had ever talked to me about sacredness of sexuality. Definitely not. And then I don't know, it was like again, another seed that was planted, and luckily I've had really amazing partners who have been so supportive, because I would have nightmares about being, chased and all these like terrible things. And for a long time I would wake up screaming, and I had these really supportive and sweet, just lovely, gentle, wonderful men in my life that always kind of got my back. But it wasn't until really, really recently, and I'm talking like the last 6 months or so, that I've been extremely candid with my husband about like, this is what I know of sexuality. And I want to explore a different way of doing things. I want to explore slow and love and, just different ways of like having pleasure. And so it's a voyage for me right now that's very, very new. But I think about like one time you posted on Instagram this picture and like a little it was like a book for young girls about like, here's your body, all about your body. And it showed like a picture of the vagina, and it showed like everything except it pointed like, here's your urethra, here's your vagina.
Drawn diagram.
A drawn diagram, and there was no
clitoris
to the clitoris.
Oh God.
And like, what if we taught our girls that sex is about pleasure as well as reproduction? And I was like, oh my God, actually your post was very like, whoa to me, because I was like, I was never taught that at all. Like, I'm just learning that as a 32-year-old adult, like that this is even possible to have a different connection of sexuality. So like, I'm sitting here right now and I've like created this altar for this conversation, and there's like a portrait of like a beautiful yoni, and like I'm learning what it means to be in relationship with sexuality. And that's where I'm at right now with that.
Oh, and it's such a big, scary, extremely vulnerable undertaking, right? To do that. Yeah, that book is put out by American Girl. It's the #1 bestseller on Amazon for like adolescent girls getting to know their body. And there's this diagram. It doesn't fucking name the clitoris. I was livid. I was fucking livid.
I just tell you that I used to sell that book as a manager at Bath and Body Works. I used to like peddle that book like, this is good for your girls, So funny. But yeah, I mean, like, it's I think about like, I have 2 nieces and I have 1 nephew, it's like since it makes me want to talk to my sisters about like, as a tia, like as an auntie, like I don't have any kids, so I have this like really interesting like aunt role, that's like very different, I think, from the mother. And it's like, okay, like I want to start a dialogue about that, like, am I allowed, of course, like if they come to me, sexuality, how do we talk about this and get on the same page with my sisters? But I think about them, and I think about, like I said, 33 decades of my life, like I'm just understanding this world or not even understanding. I'm just opening myself to understanding and creating a relationship with this concept of sexuality, sacred sexuality, and purposeful pleasure.
Yeah. And that idea, like, what if we told our kids the truth about that sex is about pleasure? Yeah. That really blew my mind when I first read it too. It was just like a Facebook link a couple years ago, and I was like, whoa, wow, what if we did do that? So it's really hard trying to navigate that with an 11-year-old. And I'm not sure how I just worded what I said earlier, but I hope she hasn't seen porn, but we have talked about it. She knows what it is, and I've had to talk to her about just this unreal concept that boys in our culture are given. And I think about, so it's interesting you talk about like 90s porn. I grew up seeing porn because my dad had a Playboy subscription, and then also in the rafters of our garage were penthouses from the 70s and 60s, Playboys from the 60s. So once we got to like middle school, our parents work, like mom would leave for work at 5 p.m. and then dad didn't get home until 6. So my sister and I would spend that hour in the garage with the ladder getting down these magazines. So like,
That's so classic.
it's so funny now because like I look at my husband Owen, you know, he's got the beard, he looks super 70s, and I'm like, did that time just like ingrain in me this love of like 70s men?
Like, oh yeah.
But I think it did, and it was very natural, right? Like there's all these like natural hairy hippies.
Yes.
In
Yes. Well, I was going to mention this and I was like, no, it's not, it doesn't fit, but now it totally does. That I remember, like, I don't know, a few years ago discovering 70s pornography and being like, oh my gosh, like these guys are like rocking these ladies and these ladies are having a good time and they're hairy. And I was like, whoa, like what would have been like, I mean, obviously it would have been better if I had like an adult communication, but like, what if this was my introduction? You know, like there's like some pleasure happening here. Not all, you know, it's a blanket statement, but it totally blew my mind. 70s porn was like one of the first times that I realized like, oh, pleasure's possible. That's cool. Like everyone's having a good time in this video.
Yeah, totally. So then I move into my teenage years in the 90s, and my dad still has a subscription. I don't think he knew that we knew where he hid it, but we sure did, you know. And then we got a computer too in the late 90s and like internet porn. And so seeing the way that sexuality is depicted, and especially the idealized image of the woman's body, it changed so much from the 70s to the 90s. And by the 90s, it was just like the same body with a different face pasted on it over and over again. And that is really what informed my sexuality on such a deep level. And what it did for me was I didn't like act out. I never really had a lot of random sex with strangers. A few drunken times I slept with someone I wouldn't have otherwise, but it was like always someone I knew and maybe kind of felt safe with. But I just kind of like froze around my sexuality, when you even kind of freeze up like during sex and just kind of like lay there because I didn't want to be doing it, but I didn't know another way to do it. I just knew that like I'm supposed to perform, I'm supposed to please and let him come.
It's not about me. Yeah, exactly. That's the end goal, and like all over you and be so happy about it. Like sorry to be so graphic, but
it's true.
You will definitely have to do the explicit thing on this one.
Oh, I always do.
So I mean, I guess what I can do now is offer a prayer to mothers and aunties out there to have, you know, these conversations in a good way. And like, to be honest, like if somebody wanted to talk to me about it, like a young woman, I would be honest, I wouldn't go as detailed as I would now, but I would say like, I am just learning this world. You know, like I don't have to be a pro just because of my age. I mean, I'm not like an elder at all, but still like just a prayer to just consider how much that could affect a woman and her power, a young woman and her power, and like, you know, stepping into who she is instead of who she thinks she needs to be. And there's so many examples of that, but that's just a prayer out there that's related to my personal story.
Well, you know what is so fucked up about our culture and gender dynamics, and obviously this is really in the process of changing right now. Just recently, like in the last 6 months, there's been this huge shift. But so the way the mass media and the way the culture has presented this to us now for decades and decades is that it's the woman's job to please the man, and always sexually, cooking the right food, looking cute, you know, all the like, read those fucking like Good Housekeeping magazines from the 50s and stuff. It's absurd. It's insane. And
if you're not happy about it, just take a little pill, you're gonna be fine.
Right. So it looks as if the women are the ones who have to try to like gain entrance into the man's approval or whatever. But really, like on a basic biological level and looking back in history, it's the opposite. Men want to gain entrance to women, literally physically, you know, but that also like that metaphor extends. And when you like really, when men are really like looking at their heart and like answering the question about what they want in a sexual exchange, most men don't just want to come on your face. Most men are like, I want to make her come. Like, there's nothing more exciting to me than making a woman have an orgasm. And so that we have twisted that around and told women it's your job to perform and to get approval from this man, when it's so the fucking opposite. Like, that, how to make my daughter see that without giving her some like ego trip that like, you're the boss, you're the queen, but you are, you know, it's like something I think about a lot, is how to present that to her.
Well, it's, you know, what's funny? It's like, as you were saying this, sometimes I get really overwhelmed by humans. Like, I'm such a social person, and people always like, oh, you're such a social butterfly. But in this like new chapter of my life, I'm finding myself like more and more interested in hanging out with like plants and dirt and plant people than like people in general. So sometimes I like totally retreat to anything David Attenborough did, like Planet Earth kind of stuff. And I swear it's like an education for me. Like, sometimes I will watch, you know, like one of my favorites that he does is called Life in the Undergrowth, and it's like all about insects, and he has like Life in Cold Blood, and it's all like reptiles and amphibians. But I'll watch these things, and they're like commentary on social structure. And, you know, you look at animals, and it's just like film after film or show after show that he does of these. You know, you'll see like these birds that are creating these like beautiful nests because they're like, come to me, we're doing everything we can, and you get to choose. And it's like, it's totally easy to like personify these animals and be like, that woman, the female's like, I don't like your house, it's not clean enough or whatever.
Your plumage isn't colorful enough for me.
I don't know about that dance. That dance is not that cool. But it's true. Like, sometimes I'll watch it and it's like this amazing, like, oh, like it makes more sense to me sometimes when I see an animal doing it instead of you know, because sometimes like humans are so complicated. We're so multi-layered and so complex. And I mean, not to say that animals aren't either, but sometimes it for me, just there's this part of my brain that it clicks and it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That totally makes sense. She's the one that is going to carry the child and bring forth the offspring and carry on the, you know, like the genetic map of this male. Of course he wants to, like, I love what you just said, gain entrance. Of course he wants to do that, or it's very interesting.
Yeah, it also makes me think of this diagram I saw in some Chinese medicine book one time, like years and years ago, of like a male and female body, and it was showing the way that energy moves through them. And for the male, it was like showing energy coming down through the head, down through the body, and out the penis. And for the female, it shows the energy coming up from the earth into the vagina and like into the heart center. And it explained like, this is why everyone's attracted to women. This is why women are attracted to women. Yeah. not just sexually, but just to be around. Why men are attracted to women and why children are attracted to women. It's like, because we have this inward pulling like sense of strength and groundedness, and like we're bringing that into ourselves.
Yeah, that's a great visual. I even had this really, like, I went to this event to offer, it was after the fires here in Mendocino County, and there was this offering, like a free clinic for anybody who was affected by the fire. And I went to bring a bunch of herbal medicine tinctures and respiratory remedies. And we went there, and this woman who I had never met before was like, hi, would you like to sit down? And I was like, yes. I was like, I'm here to be the healer, right? But she totally was like, you need to sit down. And she sat me down, and we had this talk. And one of the things that she was, you know, she put me into this sort of she guided me into this meditative space. And she asked me, like, do I see any darkness or blockages? And it was totally, my womb space was a black cave. Like, I could see nothing. It was just darkness. And she led me through this guided meditation of like lighting a fire in my womb space every day. And like, or she had me do that, and then kind of was like, you know, you have this magic match that never goes out. And we did this visualization, and I fully felt that. I felt this like pull coming from deep in the earth, coming up to like, it was like the wind coming up, the oxygen being provided to start this fire. And it's been a practice ever since that. That woman was amazing. She just like knew. But it's lovely to hear what you just said about that diagram, because I really felt that it was like, you know, we talk about I used to be a yoga teacher, and you'll talk about the bandhas, and there's like the mula bandha, which is kind of this hole down in the lower chakras. And I'm like, people are always like striving to have like, hold that mula bandha. And I have like the opposite. Like, I feel a lot of times, like, I'm like, I hear like, let that go, open yourself up, allow that breathing to happen from the outside in. And, you know, looking back at like my path in sexuality and that entryway, of course I'm like, nope, doors are shut, you know. But it's been a sweet practice to try to reopen in a safe way, you know, when I feel comfortable and when I feel safe. And I'm going to remember that visual. Thank you, Amber.
Yeah, I think it's a Taoist medicine concept. So this ties in to what's going to be my last question, which is I want to hear more about this thing that you've alluded to, feeling this big transition that's recently happened to you, where you are moving from like the maiden time in your life to the mother time in your life. Even as you are not physically birthing children, you're stepping into this archetype.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for bringing this up, because this was the thing that I didn't know how to explain when you first asked me to be on this show. It was just like something is happening and I'm not quite ready. And I needed this time, and I'm essentially, you just put it very succinctly and wonderfully. It's, I didn't grow up with archetypes. I didn't grow up with these stories. And when I live now in Mendocino County with a woman. We've been living here for 3.5 years, and she's an incredible elder who has taught over 400 people herbalism, but she doesn't just teach herbalism. I was a part of her last 9-month course. And in this course, we talked about the triple goddess. And it was the first time I'd ever heard of maiden, mother, crone concept. And she actually calls it maiden, middle woman, crone, which I really appreciate because not everyone's a mother. But then mother is also a beautiful term. And anyway, and it was really like mind blowing to me at the time. And this was 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe. And I was like, oh, I'm definitely shifting from maiden to mother. I can feel it. I'm in that place. You know, it was just like, oh, it's happening. It's happening. And I think what was really happening was that there was some general shifting of awareness and a desire and longing to be in that, in a transitional phase. Like I said, I'm a Pisces, so I'm always trying to like switch waters and jump into a different stream. So I was kind of like trying to force this archetype to birth itself upon me. And I don't know, I let it go. I think I just kind of was like, oh, it died. Like I lost interest or something. And then very recently, after the last Spirit Weavers gathering that I attended, something happened to me in the river. I jumped into this river, and I remember this moment of like taking a breath that felt different. And I remember I walked out of that river and I ran into somebody, and she's like, how are you doing? And I was like, I just woke up from a 20-year nap. And I really felt that, like this, like, whoa, like I woke up from something. And I was really riding high, and I was all excited about it and feeling really good. And I didn't know what it meant, but very quickly, I fell back into this sort of depressed state of realizing I had been asleep for so long. And this is multifaceted to everything that you and I have talked about in this conversation: my sexuality, my relationship with my sexuality, my relationship with plants, my relationship with elders, my relationship with my culture. It was like all these things were like, hey, remember us? And I was very excited at first, but then I really got sad. I really fell into this grieving, and I was in a deep, deep grieving space from about June of last year to, I would say, November of last year. It was very, very deep. And I didn't know what was happening, and I just didn't know how to explain it. And so all I could explain it was like, I'm depressed, and I was on the couch and I was crying a lot and I was eating a lot, and I was just like feeling all these things that I thought would be comforting. But again, like not having these tools, I was cutting off relationships or just avoiding people in general because I just didn't know what to do. And I realized after pretty soon after you asked me if I wanted to be on the interview, or on the show, I think that was like in November. Mm-hmm. Really soon after that, I remembered this story, this archetype of shifting. And I think I had created this story that like, I can't move into this maiden archetype until I'm a mother, like an actual mother. But Russ and I have talked at length about children, and we keep going. We're mostly leaning towards consciously choosing to not have children. And that in and of itself is just generally has been like a source of grief, not necessarily like, oh, I really want it, but just the sadness of the potentiality. And, it's just like a existential grief, I think. Mm-hmm. So I think I denied myself this concept of motherhood because I was not carrying a child, or I wasn't close to it, or I wasn't moving towards this like really physical act of carrying a child. And then in April, my sister had my niece, and now all of my sisters are mothers. And it was so beautiful to me that like, oh, all my sisters are mothers. And then it was also this sadness of like, I'm the only one who's not a mother, and I may never be consciously, you know, with choice. And it was just, again, this existential kind of sadness. And then I don't know. I don't know what, I don't have like this turning point, aha moment or anything, but it just kind of hit me one day. I think I was in the garden, and it was like, you're transitioning. Like you were Persephone in the darkness, and you are coming out into a different space. And it was this like, oh, you know, and then it became this question of like, am I invited into this archetype of motherhood, even though I wrote this poem, and one of the lines was like, with a joyfully empty womb, because it's a conscious, joyful choice. I'm okay. I'm happy with it. Am I invited? And I kept asking that question like out loud to, you know, to the trees, to the garden, to everybody. And I just kept getting this like resounding, like, of course you are. Yes, this is who you are. This is an aspect. And then because I am the youngest or whatever, my personality, I'd be like, are you sure? Like, I want to hear you really say, like, I really want you to be here, you know, like, this energy. And then I got this energy of like, the door is open. Come if you want to. I'm not going to like pull you into it. So it was like this, you can choose to take the step over the threshold and move into this new archetype energy, or you can stay maiden forever. You do you, you know, but like, I got other things to do is what the goddess is telling me. and so I've been doing a lot of exercises, really funny, interesting exercises. And some of them is just staring at myself in the mirror and just like looking, trying, you know, really like asking and looking. Usually I'll smoke some cannabis and just stare and just see who wants to present themselves to me. And that's been a really interesting experience. But a big thing that I've been doing and feeling is calling back the child that all these memories that I've lost, calling it all back in, as like sort of like an elder calling her in to tell her I love her and she's good and I've got her, I'm holding her. And I keep getting this visual of like me, this person that I'm looking at myself in the mirror, literally, you know, actually hugging and holding this little me, and just rocking her and like telling her she's okay and it's all good. And then it was like, it's been this inspiring, like, oh, like we are all mothers. We are always mothers. You know, it's always this path that's unfolding, and we can choose these directions we want to go in. But it's like, it's there. I think you probably know where I'm getting at, but it's been this like inexplicable, really welcoming, but not coddling path of just like, come if you want to. And part of that has been this candidness, really being able to speak openly and clearly about like, I'm really, you know, like I have these conversations and I'll just be like, this is some shit that I'm working on with me personally. And I can call myself out on things like I used to never be able to do. And I'm not saying I'm perfect at it, definitely not. But I can see things in a more objective view. And that's been like this, like, yes, like there is this new energy, a new wisdom that's coming forth in myself, and being excited about it, being a little bit scared about it, but mostly being excited about what that even looks like, and realizing that motherhood is just a word, right? Mother is a word. It's very charged and it carries a lot of beautiful energy. Words are very powerful, but I've been really excited about like the concept of being a tia, being an auntie, and what that looks like and how that relates to this archetype of motherhood, of showing up for these other children and people in my life.
Mm-hmm. And modeling for them all these things you've learned in this journey that you've been on. Yeah, my Celia, age 11, played Persephone in the school play last week. And it was so emotional for me.
I bet.
Just these huge concepts of, mother, daughter, the underworld, the flowers, like the earth. And
yes, and like the great joy, like she's back, back. And I've been feeling that. I've been really feeling that, like when I have these, a dream or like a vision or like a memory, when I have a memory of like, something that happened when I was 5 that I have never, I couldn't draw up, it's like, oh, she's back. It's like seeing the first daffodil of spring. It's like, oh my gosh, and that's why it feels so different. It's like, it's not like, oh yeah, this is me, I'm back. It's like she's back, and it's really exciting and fun to see it as it's like almost like a different person, a different part of me.
That's so beautiful, Vicky. Thank you for sharing all of this with us. I love how it's all like, chaotic and messy, but then it all does tie into like the greater mythology of your life. And that's all of us. So thanks for your honesty, and tell people where to find you and like what's coming up for you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Amber. This has been really, really sweet to speak to you. I've always felt so comfortable with you. And I just want to really quickly share that you are one of the first people that taught me concepts of self-care. Because I don't know if you remember this, but when you came to visit me for the first time, but I think that was the only time you've come here, you had like this crazy long drive and you were gifting me this oil, and you're like, I'm going to use this oil real quick. and you like, and you like rubbed it all over your shoulders, and you were like breathing really deeply. And I was like, whoa, you can do that? You can tend to yourself like that? So that was a long time ago. And you really like were one of the first people to like help me remember that I can take care of myself. So thank you for that. I've always loved you.
Yeah. I remember I was in a lot of pain, and I was like, and can I take a bath now? Thank you.
Yeah. And I was like, yeah, girl, get it. That's like the first thing I'm like, would you like to take a bath when people come over? Because like we have like spring water in a bath, and we are so grateful. Okay. So right now people can find me at grandmothers-medicine.com. Like I was mentioning, that'll eventually redirect to latierrabuenacollective.com. And I'm on social media on Instagram. I'm not really active on Facebook, but I'm on Instagram on both of those handles. So grandmothers_medicine will eventually be turning into a personal account. That's, still fun. And then also there's La Tierra Buena Collective. And they're both active and they're both blossoming. And, I'm teaching classes. There's a class coming up in San Francisco in the summer. I'm teaching at the Spirit Weavers Gathering. I'm so excited to be teaching at the Good Medicine Confluence. Is my first herb conference. I'm so excited.
Yay. I'm so excited.
I can't wait. It's my first time in Colorado. I just can't wait. But all of those things are at my website, grandmothers-medicine.com, and everything will be hopefully smoothly transitioning to the new website. But I'm not like the super best at getting back to people. I'll just say that. Like I write people back in my brain a lot, but forget to actually send emails back. So if I don't write you back, it's not personal. I love everybody and I love your stories. But yeah, I just things are happening. And I also love teaching. So if you have a place that you want to like hang out and teach, and specifically I'm really moving towards like cultivating herbs and growing herbs. I'm really obsessed with like soil is totally my church. So if you want to talk about growing herbs, let's do that.
Okay. I will see you in May in Colorado, and I hope to get to take some of your classes too. When I go to these things, I just end up taking classes from the same people over and over, because I'm like, this person has something to teach me. So I could see that happening this year at the Confluence.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing how it all unfolds. It's going to be so cool. Russ and Owen get to hang out. Yay.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so excited that Russ is going to be there too. Okay, yeah, Vicky, I love you. Thank you so much.
So much, Amber. Thank you.
Thank you for taking these medicine stories in. I hope they inspire you to keep walking the mythic path of your own unfolding self. I love sharing information and will always put any relevant links in the show notes. You can find my blog, handmade herbal medicines, and a lot more at mythicmedicine.love. While you're there, be sure to click the black banner across the top of the page to take my quiz, Which Magical Herb is Your Spirit Plant? It's a fun and lighthearted quiz, but the results are really in-depth and designed to bring you into closer alignment with the medicine that you're in need of. If you love the show, please consider supporting my work at patreon.com/medicine stories. There's some cool rewards there, like exclusive content, free access to my herbal ebook and online course, and the ability to chat with me. I am a crazy, busy, and overwhelmed mom, and adding another project into my life with this podcast is a questionable move, but I'm also so excited about it and just praying that the Patreon will allow me the financial wiggle room to keep doing it. Another way that you can support, if that's not an option, is to head over to iTunes and subscribe and review the podcast. That would be super helpful. Thank you. And thank you to Marie Sue for providing the music that I use. That's Marie with 2 E's, Sioux. This is from her song Wild Eyes, one of my favorites. Check out Marie Sue. Beautiful music. Thank you, and I look forward to next time. Bye.